Hi, folks. Welcome. As you're entering, get settled. We'll start in just about a moment. We're going to give a moment for everyone to join us. We're so glad you're here for Caring for Treasures at Home. Just give us one moment as everyone's entering the space. Hi, all. Welcome. We're just giving a moment, about one more minute, and then we'll get started. Thank you all for joining us today. Hello and welcome to Caring for Treasures at Home. We are going to talk to two of the conservators at Shelburne Museum, and they're going to answer some of your questions. Many of you sent in questions ahead of this. Some of you may have sent them in very recently. Those are not going to be in this presentation, but if your question isn't asked, there will be a Q&A portion at the end of this. So feel free to hold on to those. And you also may have some of the questions and wonderings answered through other folks' questions. So we have 10 overarching questions that deal with a variety of different materials and issues and things. And we have two phenomenal humans to give us some advice about that. I am so grateful to be here with two of just my cherished colleagues, Nancie and Awyn. Nancie is the Director of Collections and Conservation, and Awyn is our Associate Conservator. I am so thrilled to welcome them. I'm going to pass this over to them. Before I do, just at any point, you can communicate with me and with the conservators through the Q&A function. So if you have a question about something they're talking about, feel free to put it in there. We may hold it till the end, or I may just interrupt them if it's something that's really related to what they're talking about. But feel free to use that as a way to communicate with us, or if you have any clarifying questions or just want to share a comment about what you're learning. Nancie and Awyn, I'm going to turn it over to you. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
Well, thank you, Kat, and thanks to you all for spending your lunch hour with us. My name is Nancie Ravenel. I am Director of Conservation and Director of Collections here at Shelburne Museum. I'm an objects conservator by training, and I work with Awyn Rileybird.
Awyn Rileybird. I trained in textile conservation, and I work here as an associate conservator. Do you want to introduce Johanna?
So, not on the webinar with us today, but certainly with us in the lab and here at the museum is Johanna Pinney, who works with us as on funding from the Institute for Museum and Library Services as a preventive conservator working on a project in the EHW Memorial Building. But she is also a book and paper conservator. We're so grateful for her talents and
Yes.
here in the lab.
And as conservators, providing care for collections, conservation essentially is broken into different specialties. So we each train in different specialties. None of us have the answers to every question related to care. So it's really nice to work in a lab like this where we have people with different backgrounds and different experiences. We're constantly reaching out to folks and collaborating with people to get the knowledge and expertise necessary to care for our collections. So we want to define some keywords before we get into your questions because there is some jargon, there's some specific vocabulary, and we want to make sure everyone's on the same page. So conservation is the discipline involving treatment, preventive care, and research directed toward the long-term safekeeping of cultural heritage. And I would add to that, we also rely on codes of ethics. Our ethical approach to care is something that's really important and sort of sets us apart from some other types of approaches to care. Preservation, in contrast, is the maintenance of objects as closely as possible to their original condition. And in preservation, this refers to actions taken to prevent further changes or deterioration in objects, sites, or structures.
Yeah, and so this is what we also mean by preventive care, right? And I'll push back a little bit about original condition. It's pretty rare here at Shelburne Museum that when things come into our care that we receive them in original condition. Yes, with contemporary art that's the case, but a 19th century painting is unlikely to be in its original condition. So really here, preservation is about keeping it from changing any more than it already has,
Yeah.
slowing down those reactions.
Yeah. And another word, sort of related, but its own sort of separate category is restoration. And this is the process of making changes to an object or to a structure so that it will closely approximate its original state or a state at a specific period of time. And then we move on to sort of people doing jobs
Right,
related to care.
right. So conservators are the people who are responsible for the physical care of that collection, those collection items. We document with photography and in reports. We do hands-on care or treatment of the works of art. We um, contribute to preventive care in monitoring and the like, setting guidelines, and we do research to help inform us of our treatment procedures, what the object is made of, and the like. In contrast, curators are people who do research about context of the items. They interpret the collections through labels. They present exhibitions. And they also, here at Shelburne Museum, they are the people who make the decisions as to what comes into the collection. They have created a document that highlights where we're interested in collecting for the future. And this is not to say when I say conservators are the professionals responsible for the physical care of the collection. I think that I do want to point out that there's a lot of people here at the Shelburne Museum who are involved in collections care, who are collections care professionals. They include the folks in buildings preservation, the carpenters, the painters, the folks who work on the HVAC system and the electrical systems, as well as the other people in the collections department, the registrars, the preparator, the art handlers. We are all collections care professionals, and to some extent too, the people in the security folks,
Oh, yeah, protective services.
protection services. They keep eyes on this collection 24/7 and are really critical for us being able to do our jobs in the way we can.
Yeah, and teamwork is a theme that will continue into care of collections at your home. And so you'll see this theme of teamwork come up quite a few times. So a couple questions that we got, and actually just as museum professionals, questions we get pretty frequently are about appraisals and donations. And I will say that, especially with appraisals, that's not part of our expertise. It's not part of the expertise of the curators either. But there are professionals and professional organizations for appraisals, and we've listed three of those organizations here. Those are places that would have more resources for you. There are publications called auction price indexes or auction price guides. And if you look at recent price indices, those will be places you could start to get an idea of what something you own might be worth at auction. And in terms of donations, it really depends on what you have and the value, which might be monetary value or historical value. It might be sentimental value, and understanding what the value is an important step when you're considering donating something. You could look for institutions with a strong connection to the object that you have, something that relates to its story or where it was made. But something to keep in mind, many museums are restrained by storage space. And many museums have very specific types of items they are willing to receive. So something you want to avoid is just bringing an item to a museum. It's never a good idea. It puts the object at harm possibly, and we can't guarantee that someone would be able to see it or meet with you. So if you are interested, it's always good to reach out by email or phone to an institution as a first step. Okay, now, before we dig into your questions, we also want to provide context about the things that can damage your collection items. And we have a set of 10 agents of deterioration that are the primary hazards to your collection items. So this includes things like water. So if there's a pipe burst or a flood, those can stain or physically distort collection items. You want to consider vandalism and theft, right? So if you have, for instance, high value jewelry at home, that's something you might want to consider keeping in a safe. Um, we won't go into all of these here, but it's good to sort of look at this list and keep things like light and incorrect temperature in mind. And we're going to bring up some of these agents of deterioration as we cover your questions.
Great. So I'm back with our first kind of question theme. And our first question, which Nancie is going to address, is questions about caring for ceramics. So Francie Downing sent in, does sunlight affect porcelain objects? And then someone else asked, where can I go to have fine china pasted back together after it's broken? So Nancie, will you tell us a little bit about caring for ceramics?
Sure. So ceramics are made of earth materials that are go through a firing process. So they've actually been through quite a bit of heat. And the decorative and decorations on these wares have also, generally speaking, been through this heat. If they're a glaze, there are painted ceramics, and that's a little different. So on this jug by Paul Scott, I'm not so concerned about the amount of light this receives because the decorations have been fired on, that they've been through a fire. These are almost like in a glassy state. Um, so again, if your piece is Francie, if your pieces are whole and haven't been repaired and don't have any physical paint on them, then you can, generally speaking, we don't need to worry about how much light they get. However, if your piece has been restored in the past and on the right, you see a bowl where the bowl has broken, it was put back together, and then somebody repainted quite a bit of the surface. So what you see, that kind of creamy color, is the paint that a restorer applied covering most of the interior of that bowl. With that paint being exposed to light, the colors, if there's a varnish, it can yellow. If the paints are of a certain nature, they may also shift in color. So that's the kind of thing that you may not want to keep exposed to a lot of light. The other thing I wanted to point out is this doesn't happen with porcelain, but it can happen with lower fired ceramics like stoneware or earthenware, that there are sometimes inclusions. There are things in that clay body that might expand and contract on exposure to heat or high relative humidity. And so what you see on the left is a stoneware crock that it was placed very close to a fluorescent bulb, which does give off a certain amount of heat
Mm.
in the case. And we couldn't see that there was an inclusion in the clay body, but clearly there was some expansion and contraction as that light went on and off with time, and ultimately that inclusion popped, and which led to this crack in the vessel. So you do need to be concerned about heat and relative humidity, in terms of placement near a light.
Mhm.
As far as repairing broken wares, I'll say it depends. That is a phrase you'll hear conservators use a lot. It depends. You want to be careful about the kinds of adhesives that are used, and where you then display that work. And I do recommend reaching out to your local museum or the American Institute for Conservation. Their website has a interactive database of conservators in your area. It's sort of location based, and
Mhm.
so you can put in what your zip code is and say, I want to look for someone within um, 50 or 100 miles, and it will bring up conservators in the area of specialization that you require. Um,
Yeah, so I do think a shattered ceramic is a good time to get in touch with a conservator,
Absolutely.
for sure.
Wonderful. Thanks so much for that. And next question, question two for Awyn is when you're approaching preservation of historic needlework, what suggestions do you have for us? And this comes from a question originating from Frederica Foreman. So thanks so much, Awyn, for addressing that.
Sure. So at Shelburne Museum, we have quite a few needleworks, and I wanted to show you an example of how we store them at the museum, um, and some or transport them at the museum. And essentially, here on the left, you see an archival box, and there's an archival blue board tray. And here there are a couple of needlework stored side by side. We have these um, ethofoam bumpers, but on the right, I wanted to give you a detailed image showing this padded board underneath the needlework. So this is an archival blue board that has a very thin layer of polyester batting, and then that's covered with cotton cloth. And we use these padded boards to stitch needleworks onto the board, providing a rigid but gentle support. So if you were interested in, for instance, framing a needlework, I would recommend in most cases using a padded board method. And now at home, a sort of simpler solution if you want to be storing your needleworks would be to make your own cloth covered board. So again, I would recommend an archival um, cardboard, often referred to as blue board. So you have a piece of this archival board, and then you would cover it with a clean piece of cotton cloth. And you want to make sure that the cloth is sort of soft. It could be unbleached muslin. It could be an old bed sheet that's been washed a few times just to make sure it's really clean. And you want to attach that to the board. You could make a sleeve by sewing a tube of that cotton and then inserting the cardboard into the tube. Or you could glue the edges of this cotton cloth to the back of the board using something like a PVA glue or even really like an Elmer's glue um, to the back. And so then you have this gently wrapped board. And then the next step you would want to do is to get archival tissue, so acid-free tissue. And here, you're going to fold the tissue over the needlework to make a sort of custom envelope. And on the image on the right, I've highlighted these fold lines. And I really want you to pay attention to the fact that there's a little space, maybe an eighth of an inch or quarter of an inch of space outside of the needlework. And that's where that fold in the tissue is. And the reason for that little space is so that when the tissue folds, you're not folding the needlework edge as well, because that could lead to a crease or it could lead to damage. So just this little zone of space is going to make it comfortable and secure. And so this is what it would look like at the end of this rehousing process. You would have a fabric covered board, and then you would have the needlework wrapped in tissue. And one thing I do want to clarify just right there is the Elmer's glue would only ever be used for that cotton cloth covering the board. You would not want to use that directly on the needlework at all. So this is one way that you could take care of your needleworks at home. You could store this on the top of a drawer. You could store this in an archival box. Just wherever it's stored, make sure the needlework's not crushed with something heavy on top.
Thanks, Awyn. Nancie, our next question is about artwork. What is the best way to remove foxing from artwork? And for those of us who don't know, will you tell us what foxing is?
I'd be happy to tell you what foxing is. The frustrating thing is that there's not a specific thing that foxing is. It's actually a kind of a class of issues that all look like these kind of spots that you see on these documents that we're showing you here. It could be sort of a darkening that occurs on cellulosic materials like cotton fabric or paper. It could be a result of some sort of inclusion. So metal inclusions can be in ceramics, but they can also be in paper works or in cotton. And so sometimes if your item with those inclusions is exposed to a high relative humidity, you get like this kind of filiform, this kind of florally looking um, stain in the cellulose. But it could also be related to mold or mildew, and the hyphae and the mold forms will also darken with age as well. Because the source of foxing, because there isn't just one kind of foxing, there's not just one way of dealing with it. And I think your best solution if you find it so distracting or disturbing is to take the item to a conservator, a paper conservator or a textile conservator to diagnose the issue and suggest a solution to it.
And I think something, both here, at our museum or just working as a museum conservator, oftentimes sort of minimal intervention is really the best. Sort of focusing on the storage environment and preventing damage is really where we can do a lot of good work. So if there's a paper that wasn't foxed that's starting to fox rapidly, I would look at your storage environment and say maybe that's too much humidity where you have it stored. But in general, lots of paper and textiles can have foxing, and most of the time, we just sort of let it be.
And our next question is about antique quilts. And this comes to us from Paula Korich. So Paula's wondering, how do you care for antique quilts, which our collection has many of?
Yes, and lots of interesting quilts coming on display this season too. Um, so again, just sort of thinking first about storage, just because that's such an essential part of collections care. Um, One thing with larger textiles that need to be folded for storage is that you want to make sure any folded areas are padded out. So there are a couple things you could use for padding. Here in the images that you see, conservators have made these stockinette tubes that have a little bit of polyester batting as fill. And those stockinette tubes are then inserted anywhere that there's a fold. Another option is to use an acid-free, unbuffered tissue paper, and you sort of crumple up the tissue paper and then roll it to just make a similar sort of sausage out of tissue paper. And so that is really a great way to store your quilts. You could also think about, once it's folded, taking a clean cotton cloth and then wrapping that and making a fabric envelope, sort of like how you saw with the needlework, just with cloth here used for that envelope. That envelope is going to help keep light away from the textile. It's going to make handling the textile easier, and it might even help keep some pests away from silks or wool that could be susceptible to damage from pests. So, another general aspect to think about with quilts is going to be light exposure. So if you are displaying your quilts, say draped over a couch, or if it has a mount and it's attached to the wall, you want to make sure there's no direct sunlight coming in from a window nearby. If it's in a room with windows, one option is to add UV filter film. Essentially, film that you can put on the window that's going to block UV radiation, which can really do some harm, both to dyes and fading dyes, but also to fibers. It can actually start to degrade fibers. So, other simple solutions in rooms where you're displaying quilts include making sure that shutters or blinds or curtains are closed when you're not using that space. So those are some tools for quilts. Yeah.
So just to somebody's in is noting that neither picture are people wearing gloves. Do you want to speak to the use of
Yeah.
gloves when handling large
Well,
quilts?
great observation there. Yeah, so in general, with handling a lot of materials, conservators tend to use their hands, specifically clean hands, recently washed hands, because our skin can develop some oils and things that can transfer and cause damage. But clean hands, are really good because you get sensory feedback. So when you touch a material, you can start to tell, is it super brittle? Is it already beginning to tear? Or you just get some of that touch feedback that's
Yeah,
really helpful.
yeah.
So we tend not to wear gloves unless we're handling metal. That's one case where we always tend to wear gloves.
Yeah.
And Awyn, there was one other slight
Yeah.
clarifying question about that, which
Yes.
is, can you speak a little bit to a fabric envelope and that and how that would address keeping bugs out? Is it just the fabric is enough, or if you want to just speak a little bit more to that, and then we'll move on to the next question.
Yes. So essentially, if you have a large sheet of cotton, and then you have your folded quilt in the middle. You want to make sure there's a good amount of excess beyond that folded quilt. And then you're sort of wrapping the quilt with the cotton. And when that quilt is encapsulated with the cotton fabric, it does provide a barrier to moths or domestic like carpet beetles that might crawl or fly and it's not going to provide 100% protection because they can get through little cracks and things, but it's a good way to slow the spread and mitigate that risk of pest damage.
Thanks so much for addressing that.
Mhm.
Nancy, our fifth question is about furniture. So we're going into furniture realm. Frederica had a question about preservation of 18th and 19th century furniture, especially veneered pieces. And then Francie Downing was asking about antique furniture. How often should you wax it? How to clean it or dust it? Is there a best wax or cleaning technique that you suggest?
Yeah. So thanks for those questions. So just to sort of come back and just describe what veneered furniture is. People may already know, but I just wanted to sort of highlight how this is done. So veneering is a process in which a more expensive wood, like rosewood in this example, is adhered to a less expensive wood, such as poplar or pine. And I mean, the reason is, that your furniture maker needs to make a living, and so therefore, why have these very expensive boards full width if you can just use a thinner piece of wood that's adhered to a less expensive wood? So what happens when you have these highly figured veneers on another layer of wood, usually adhered to one another with a protein-based glue, like a hide glue, is that if these furnishings are in spaces that have either high or low humidities, that bond between the two layers can break down, and so you end up with lifting veneers. And sometimes because you've got the highly figured surface, that thin layer of wood can also warp if it's also become detached from the surface. So my advice is to look the piece of furniture over very carefully before you clean it. I would use something like uh, a, microfiber cloth, something that's that's smooth to remove dust. You could also consider putting the furniture um, brush on if you have a multi-speed vacuum cleaner, and putting the vacuum cleaner on low, and then you can use a second sort of soft, like a big buffy makeup brush, or like a 3-inch wide soft bristle brush, and you can dust, sort of turn on your vacuum cleaner and move the dust into the vacuum that way. That's something I do quite frequently. Um, I don't recommend things like feather dusters. And if you are using the brush method, be very aware of where you might have lifting veneers, because sometimes brush bristles get caught in between the two layers. I don't recommend and on the topic of how often should I wax it, I consider a process like waxing to be a less is more kind of thing. If you wax something over and over again, you end up with like this waxy buildup, which ultimately someone will have to strip using solvents to get rid of, because the wax, when it gets thicker, can look gray or white and just makes and looks dingy. That waxy surface, depending on what waxes are present in the mixture that you're using, that can also attract. I know that there was a brand of wax that's very popular, for that's marketed as something appropriate for conservation and restoration, but was developed in the United Kingdom. And when I was working in Washington, D.C., my supervisor there pointed out the fact that because that wax was marketed or made for the United Kingdom, it can get tacky in the August, summertime temperatures of Washington, D.C. The other thing to remember about paste waxes that are available from the hardware store is that they are commercial materials, and companies will change out what is in those materials, sometimes without a huge amount of um, notice. So here in the lab, I formulate my own waxes when I use them. I have blocks of microcrystalline wax that melt at specific temperatures, as well as beeswax and carnauba wax, and I create my own concoction for that. Um, but honestly, we don't wax kind of regularly or with any, as kind of a maintenance procedure, because it you do run the risk of developing that buildup of wax.
So microfiber cloths, good for cleaning, but be careful of snagging whatever you're using. And then at home, growing up, we were a pledge household. So is that something to consider or use or avoid?
So here at the museum, that they had also used pledge a lot, back in the day before there were conservators on site. And what pledges is a an oil, effectively. It's a lemon oil. And what happens is if you have an aged varnish on the surface of your furniture, um, that oil eventually will turn white or gray with age. And so the what happens is then you see this white or grayish haze on your furniture, and you're just like, oh my gosh, it's dirty. It's time to go over it with pledge again. So again, you're creating this kind of buildup of material on the surface.
So
So
less is more.
less is more. Let's avoid pledge if you can. And I love this work by this Tiffany armchair in the collection. One of the things I did when it came to me for conservation was to remove the buildup of wax that had formed in the interstices of the carving, which there's a lot of carving there,
Yeah.
and it was hiding the gilding, which is a shame.
Thanks so much for that. I know it's these things like I grew up in a pledge household too. It feels like that must be the thing. I just want to go back. I love Ewan, when you were talking about quilts. Fabric envelope and similar sausage. These are two phrases I didn't think would come out of this. And pledge
Yeah.
household. So we're learning so much. Our sixth question for Awyn is this is from Rosemary Kahn, and Rosemary has a handmade white lace cap or coif made in France in the late 1800s. It was in pristine condition when it was given to Rosemary 30 years ago, and they put it into a box frame. The lace on the edges is beginning to yellow. Should Rosemary remove it from the frame? What should Rosemary do, and can the yellowing be stopped?
Sure. So thank you for that question. And I just want to talk a little bit first about, yellowing in fabrics. So this image is of a Millerite banner that will be going on display soon. And this is a cotton banner with paints and ink. And I want to zoom in to this area. And you can see there are these sort of white, cloudy areas around some of the figures. And originally, the fabric would have been much brighter, and that white was probably used as sort of a correction fluid. And so that white wouldn't have been as visible as it is today. But over the last 200 years, these fibers are beginning to slowly degrade. And part of that degradation process, when some of these fibers and molecules are breaking down into smaller bits, is that it then causes discoloration, oftentimes a sort of yellow or brown color to develop. So do come see this discolored banner and all its magnificent figures and text at Varied and Alive, which will be coming up and opening in May. But here is a picture of discolored silk, sort of perhaps similar to in material to what the question mentioned. And so here, especially around the edges of this lace, you're getting this discoloration. This is just a natural part of some fiber aging. But I do want to mention in the case of this question that the object is contained in a sort of box frame, a sort of shadow box. And it is interesting that the discoloration happened rapidly over the last 30 years. And so it could be an instance where the materials, perhaps the wood used in the frame or some adhesives used for different parts of the frame, might be putting pollutants into that box and accelerating that discoloration. So I do think for this question asker, it could be valuable to perhaps take that object in the frame to a high quality framer, someone that could help you look at those materials and see if they really are archival or not. And they might be able to help you determine if it's worth reframing that or not. Um, in general, for yellowing fabrics, again, we're often going to just let that sort of be and take a less is more approach. There are cases when we might consider wet cleaning or immersion bathing something. That can start to get technical, and you might want to reach out to a conservator just because you don't want to cause damage in any of those processes.
Thanks so much for that, Awyn. Another textile related question for you. Where can I go to have color restored if a textile has faded? Where would you suggest people go, or what do they do?
Thank you. I really appreciate this question because it comes up a lot. And, color is an essential part of a lot of textiles and how we experience them. So I do want to give you an example of a hooked rug from our collection. This hooked rug is currently on display in the Dana Spencer Textile Galleries at Hat and Fragrance. So you can see that when we open in May. And I'll zoom in here. So here on this rug, this whole area has turned sort of gray and um, But underneath in the pile, if you sort of gently separate the pile, you can see this area was originally this sort of vibrant royal blue. And that color is gone now on the surface. And that's probably because of extended exposure to light. But I will say, especially, in a conservation context, this is one case where we really just let this be what it is. Um, if you try to add colorants or paint, you're adding non-original materials, you're potentially causing damage or unintended consequences. So recoloring is not something we would really consider in the vast majority of cases. If there is something at home that's really, precious or that you have a special connection to, one alternative option is to create a reconstruction yourself, right? So if this is a hooked rug with fading, you could choose to make a new hooked rug and use the color information you have available to reconstruct this object as it would have looked originally. So that's one option for cases like that.
Thank you. Yeah, I couldn't even believe that little color peek out behind that. So effective to see
Dramatic.
how much things can fade.
Mhm.
Nancie, this is for you, and this is a question about how one should preserve historic tinware. How do you prevent rust? And this comes to us from Frederica.
Thanks, Frederica. So, again, less is this is another less is more kind of situation. This great little tin whimsy bowl of flowers is in our collection, and I hope you can see there are areas. Let's see, can I? Yeah. So there's spots of rust on it. Um, so those that rust likely occurred because the whimsy was being housed in an area that has a high relative humidity, or maybe it got wet and the water wasn't taken off of it quickly enough. Um, my suggestion is really just to keep these items in as dry a condition as you can. If you need to uh, put a dehumidifier in your room where you keep this in the summertime, or even at times like this where conditions outside are rapidly changing. We experience some of our highest relative humidities in the shoulder seasons in the spring and in the fall. Fans in the room can also help too with
Mhm.
mitigating high relative humidity time periods. Um, so basically, I'm suggesting preventing it from happening further. I don't really recommend somebody trying to remove rust and crustaceans themselves.
So don't take a toothbrush to it.
Don't, well, I'm not, well, you could, but I'm not sure it's going to do much because usually those rust crusts are pretty tightly held. Um, it's something removing of rust often is done under the microscope in the lab, so you can really see what you're doing. Um, so if you do have paint that if your tinware is painted and it's flaking, then it's also time to take it to a conservator so that paint can be reattached. But again, just keep it clean, well dusted, and in as dry a condition as you can.
Great. So again, focusing on the storage environment.
Nancie, you gave me another favorite phrase, rust crust.
That's fun.
Amazing. Our ninth question for Awyn. This person, Jenny, is hoping you'll discuss methods for preserving photos and old documents. Jenny shares that after her mother's death at age of 100, she found many documents and photos dating back to the 1800s and 1900s among her things. She's given some of these to historical societies in the applicable towns, but there's still some in her possession. How would you best suggest preserving those?
Well, thank you for this question. And it sounds like you're already taking really great care of this collection. Um, and yeah, it's something a lot of us face. My mom is going through a lot of my grandmother's belongings now, and it's something we can relate to, for sure. The good news is there are many resources online for photograph and document preservation. The Library of Congress has a lot of good resources, different museums. Um,
The Northeast Document Center, Conservation
mhm.
Center has some great resources as well.
And so we will give you some tips and tricks here, but there are a lot of good resources online as well. So in terms of storage materials appropriate for photographs and documents, there are three plastics that are going to be sort of suitable for archival storage. Those are going to be polyester, polypropylene, and polyethylene. And so you want to make sure that any storage materials you're using that are plastic are one of those three types. You want to avoid anything with PVC. Nothing.
Polyvinyl chloride.
Yes. And just nothing with coatings on it. So these are good things to look for. Another key thing to look for is look for storage materials that have passed the photographic activity test or the PAT. This is an industry standard that just um, performs scientific testing to ensure that the storage materials won't react and negatively impact photographs.
So oftentimes in descriptions of materials, if you're looking at them online, they'll say whether or not this material has passed the
Yes.
PAT test.
So that, yeah, that supply should be labeled with that. Cooler temperatures are good for photo preservation. Um, Important to note, you probably want to avoid basements though, because they are susceptible to really high levels of moisture and even flooding. So even though it might be cooler, maybe choose a different space that's cool and dark. You want to avoid high humidity storage environments for sure. That can cause photos and paper to warp. And yeah, things like archival storage boxes can act as a sort of buffer to some of that. So just um, making sure you have these sort of housing materials around these items. Also, really important for this, and honestly for anything, it's great to add notes and labels to things that are important to you. So for photographs or paper, on the back, you could consider adding a note in graphite or pencil, or on a separate piece of archival paper, you could add that note and then store it in an envelope with it. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
And also just anything I shared earlier that my grandmother had added notes inside vases in her house to let my father and his brothers know what she thought was important and what's important for the family to keep.
Yeah, and that
To keep.
context is critical
Oh my God.
for, caring for collections, getting them to the right place. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Our final predetermined question is for Nancie, and that is in the care and keeping of silver objects. How often should you polish? Is there a best product you should use? Does sunlight affect silver? And can you address those just in general, the keeping and care of silver?
Sure. So, as far as keeping in care go, well, to back up, what tarnish is? Tarnish is a corrosion product that is formed when silver objects meet sulfur in the atmosphere, and so that will form initially as kind of pink or yellow films on the surface, and you can see some of those here, say right up here, or down here. That's where the tarnish is in its early period, and it's actually not very tightly held. So tarnish removal at this point can often be done just with a soft cloth, like a flannel, or if it's appropriate, washing it with water and a very small amount of a very mild detergent, such as ivory or Orvis. And that will actually take off the tarnish without having to go through some sort of abrasive technique like polishing. If I do have to polish something in the lab, one of my favorite tools to use. Well, first of all, I try not to let anything get too much further than what you see here. And then I will use something like a soft cloth or wash it um, using a cotton pad or a cotton wadding. This is a jewelry cloth. And so it's got two layers. One is a flannel that does not have a tremendous amount of the rouge cloth on it, the rouge from the rouge cloth. So you can use this cloth with this very small amount of abrasive material, and it's a very fine abrasive material to polish areas that are sort of lightly tarnished. In areas where there's more heavy, sort of black tarnish, I might use it's going to sound crazy, but I might use a white plastic eraser. And that does a really great job of very locally cleaning. My issue, if I do, there's also a polish that I will make up here in the lab using precipitated chalk, calcium carbonate, and water with a little bit of ethanol. The issue there is actually getting it out of the crevices. And you want to make sure that if you go to that level, that you want to get that fully out of the thing.
Mhm.
Here, this handle on this darning egg is silver plate, and you can see some of the pitfalls of over polishing or polishing too often, in that the silver is actually removed from areas here and here. So with repeated polishing, particularly on silver plate, you can totally wear away your silver. And what you're left with is a base material. Sometimes that is silver colored, but it's just not as bright as silver is, and sometimes it's copper.
Yeah, and so once again, we're aiming towards sort of less is more and getting a good storage environment.
Yeah, and so another thing you can do for your storage environment is to keep your silver in an enclosure that is lined with something that will scavenge, that will take out the pollution from the air. And that might be a bag made out of a silver cloth bag, which has the material within the fabric. Or you can get a product like that's called Corrosion Intercept, which is a plastic that has copper in it. So the copper will preferentially, similar to the cotton bag for your quilts, it will absorb the pollutant before it gets to your object.
And so we do want to point you to a couple other sort of useful resources available to you. One is just your own network, your existing network of people. Again, teamwork makes the dream work. Ask people you know that have special craft skills. So if you have, say, a hooked rug that needs repair or cleaning or something, ask folks that you know who make hooked rugs. You don't know anyone who makes hooked rugs? There are local craft guilds for all sorts of different crafts. And these are across the nation and all sorts of communities. And they're people with expertise in making things. And often they're the same people that really know how to provide sort of everyday good care for those items too. There's lots of info online. Just make sure it's from a trusted source, right? So from a trusted museum or from the Smithsonian Museum or, yeah, someone that you know, the information is going to be good. Nancie mentioned the American Institute for Conservation. So if you do have an item and it gets to a point you really want to seek the help of a conservator, you can use the Find a Professional member tool to locate someone and ask for help. And as a bonus for registering for this webinar, you're going to get an email with links to additional resources that might help you. So with that, thank you. And with the remaining time, I'll pass it back to Kat for some more questions.
Thank you so much. Let me turn my video back on and join you all. Thank you so much for that information. We're going to try to get through as many of these questions as we can, but always feel free to get in touch if you need that. So, from Ed. We have several silk kimonos that are 50 years old and older. How's the best way to store them? There's some stains on them. Is there a best way to clean them before them? This is also a story about cleaning, or also a question about cleaning a 36-year-old rug. And how do you do that? And the cotton kimono with indigo coloring. Ed is wondering about kimonos and cleaning silk kimonos and a
Okay.
rug. Yes.
Yeah. So I'm going to start with storing the kimonos. Um, Garments, you want to treat sort of the way that I showed with the quilts, where any folds are going to be padded out. So oftentimes you're going to need to fold clothing to make it more compact for storage, and just anywhere you put a fold, you want to have padded support. That's going to help prevent creases and even tears over time. In terms of cleaning a kimono, there are various risks involved in that. And so that might be another case where you want to reach out to a conservator. Um, Working with a conservator in private practice can be expensive. So I do want to acknowledge that. And it might be inaccessible for some folks. So if that's not an option for you, again, reach out to people with expertise on a specific topic. People who have an archive of kimonos or work with them frequently and might be able to help you identify some spot cleaning techniques or something. And so with the rug, I would say one thing you could consider if conservation services might be out of reach is to look for a local rug store that offers cleaning services. But before you just bring your rug there, you want to make sure you ask about their processes. You want to ask how they're washing it, what kind of care they're providing, and get a sense of if they're preservation minded. And yeah, because sometimes cleaning all the way back to like this bright, shiny original, that actually could do damage. So if they're a place that understands something like that, the difference or just appreciates being gentle and treating these things with care and respect, that would be a good place to
Yeah.
work with.
So on the Find a Conservator link that we shared earlier from the AIC, they also have questions to ask really anyone
Hmm.
who works on items, and it's a great place to start. Ask for references. I would also expect that or ask that they write down for you what their processes are if you can get that
Hmm.
information.
That's a great, and I think that's a great write down provenance of something, write down what you know about it, write down care and cleaning suggested to you so that you have those with these things and keep them with you. I'm going to try to get in a couple more questions. We might go a little bit after one. Someone has a framed picture from their grandmother's estate, and it was a sketch made in Indonesia, and it has disappeared on paper due to light damage. Is there any way for the picture to be restored?
Unlikely. You may be able to recover what the image is with if you can bring it to someone who can take a picture of it in ultraviolet light or in infrared light. There may be traces of something there that can be seen that way. But to Awyn's point, if there's good photos of it before it deteriorated, before it faded, then maybe have a reproduction made.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for that. Can you speak a little bit about old leather, keeping and carrying old leather, especially some that may be starting to deteriorate?
Yeah, so without knowing a ton about your old leather piece, well, so again, less is more. Keeping it in decent conditions. In the case of a piece of leather, leather can be quite acidic, so you want to be careful that the materials that you're storing it with are not super alkaline, because then you can get deterioration. So you're looking for unbuffered materials, unbuffered paper products. You will probably not want to apply a dressing to it again, because it's dressings are basically oils. And if you can think about like women in her makeup, they talk about like less oily makeup that don't prevent pimples. I mean, leather is skin, so you kind of can make that connection. Keeping it less is more. Decent relative humidity, keeping it on the like not too dry, not too wet, something in the middle there. And if you are starting to get red rot, which is that issue where the leather is getting kind of dark brown and powdery, then there are things that conservators can do. Book conservators certainly can do this as well. Um, to keep that from getting worse. But effectively, it is something that has started, and it there's nothing that can be done to reverse it, unfortunately.
Mm. I had a question in there, and I just want everybody to know, and then we're going to do one more question, and then I think we have to close it up. But no, we can continue to have these conversations in other ways. And one of the questions in here is about this slideshow and the resources presented. This will be up on our website, hopefully by the end of this week. And because you're signed up for this, you will get an email with all of the resources that are suggested in here and a link to the recording of this. So you'll be able to see the slides, you'll be able to revisit some of the questions answered, and you'll have that list of resources as well. So I just want everybody to know that. Okay. Louise asks, and I think this will have to be our final question. And I apologize for the questions we didn't get to. These folks are so amazing, and you just your expertise and your knowledge and your ideas is so wonderful to share with us. So, Louise has a painting, oil on canvas board, done by an ancestor, and it is badly damaged, maybe from moisture. Unsure it came that way, but a fair amount of the paint is chipped, and some of the canvas has lifted from the board. Ultimately, Louise is hoping to find someone to restore it. In the meantime, Louise had it professionally framed with a mat and glass to prevent further damage. Was that a mistake?
Hard to tell. Um, I, I, I don't think so. And I think the other thing that Louise might consider is getting a backing put on the painting, depending on where she's hanging it, particularly if she's hanging it on an exterior wall of her house. Um, the glazing will definitely create a barrier against any kind of pollution or fluctuations in relative humidity in her house. A backing will do it as well, will also help in that regard. So I,
I also think if it is actively flaking, that frame will also be catching
true.
any fragments of the paint. So that is a benefit of your current sort of housing for that.
Mhm.
So I don't think it was a mistake.
No.
Yeah. And yeah, it's a great way to just keep it all together until you can get it to a professional.
Mm. Awen and Nancy, thank you so much. Any final thoughts that you'd like to leave our participants with today before we close up?
Well, I think I did note a conservator colleague was also watching. Hey, Meg, good to see you in the chat in the questions. And she pointed out very kindly that a lot of conservators are willing to also respond to DIY questions. So with that invitation, don't even
Mhm.
though it can be expensive, don't hesitate to reach out to your local conservator. We're great people. We're fun to be around.
Is there a
And
best way for folks to reach out to you?
I think that if for Shelburne Museum, your folks are always welcome to send us questions via the conservation@shelburnemuseum.org email address.
Wonderful.
But for conservators in private practice in the wider area, if you are getting their name through the Find a Conservation Professional, use their email address as a starting point, and then you can
Mhm.
always make an appointment for a phone call.
And quite a few private practice conservators have great websites with additional resources and easy ways to get in touch there too.
Thank you both so much. And thank you to everybody who submitted questions that really allowed for us to have these rich discussions and offer some strategies and thinking and innovations on how you might care for your treasures at home. Nancie and Awyn, thank you so much. Again, this will be on our website by the end of the week. And we want to thank Isa, who is doing the behind the scenes work, technology wise, for us today. Thank you again so much for joining us, and I hope you have a wonderful day, and I hope you feel more equipped to care for your special treasures. Thanks so much for joining us. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.